Hello guys, welcome to my channel. So in this video we will see the export pivot issue. So how to solve that, how to export your mesh from anywhere on the scene with the correct pivot. So before I start with the solution, I will tell why it happens. So if you directly want to see the solution, you can just skip ahead and you can refer to, so we are going to use a game exporter that comes with Maya. So this is I'll just add this into the description as well. So this is what we are going to use, and this is what you can refer to as well. So here they have explained everything very clearly, so you can also refer to this document. Okay, so let's start. So I'll just add in cylinder. So this is where it will pop up. So I'll just make this a little big so that we can see. So in Unreal, the pivot is considered as where your mesh has been located on the grid. So Unreal doesn't know you're exporting it from Maya. It just what it knows is this is a FBX. So the FBX information or pivot will be considered as where you have kept your mesh on the scene. So for example, now you can see the pivot is over here in the center of the grid and in the center of the mesh. So if you move this, still your pivot is in the center of the mesh, but now you have moved your mesh to the line, the floor on the grid. You can see this, you can just imagine this as the floor. So same thing in Unreal, we have this grid, right? So if I delete this, we have this grid over here. So this is what Unreal will consider as your pivot. So it doesn't matter where you place your pivot inside of Maya, it will always consider this line as the pivot. So if I've kept it over here, this is the where the pivot will appear. If I kept it like this is where the pivot will appear. So this is same for AR VR applications, like the applications you see on websites where you can rotate your 3D model. This is the same concept that you have to follow over there as well. So I'll just explain. So I'll keep the mesh onto the grid's flow, onto the flow. Then I'll just duplicate this and I'll keep this mesh here. So now it doesn't matter where you keep your pivot. So, but in Unreal, how it will show is the pivot will appear onto the center of the grid. So I'll just keep the pivot here. This is how it will consider inside Unreal Engine. So I'll just keep the pivot onto the mesh and we'll export this mesh and we'll see. So I'll just export this single mesh. So I already have some files over here. I'll just create a new one. Just make this a static mesh cylinder 01. Okay, so I'll just hit export selection. Same with this. I'll just go on export selection. Here, I guess we don't need all these things. Geometry, you can turn on smoothing groups as well. Drag and drop both of my exports. Here, this is the one which was exported first, and this is the second one. So if you see here, I have turned on the smoothing groups to the second one, not the first. So you can see there's some normal issues. Okay, so now you can see this is the cylinder, same as this one. So you can see the pivot is in the center, but when it was exported to Unreal, the pivot has been changed. And if I input this one, so you can see the pivot is on the bottom of the mesh. So here, if you see, the pivot is in the center of the mesh, but the mesh is in center of the grid. So this is what Unreal will consider as your pivot. So every time you want to export, so if you have multiple objects, so every time you want to export, you have to move them to the center of the grid and then export. But that's a long process, right? So for that we have game exporter. So I'll just select this mesh. I'll just set the pivot for every mesh onto the bottom. So now we have mesh on different location, and just for this mesh, this one, just keep the pivot on the top. So we'll export this and this. So now let's see how we can export the mesh using game exporter. I'll just click on file, game exporter, and here you have the settings. So you can just keep this and turn off other settings. So by default, skinning and blend shapes will be on. So if you need them, you can keep, or you can just turn them off. So here we have presets, so you can create your own presets for animation, model, and etc. So here we have the export sets, so you can select on export all selection or object sets. So if you click on export all, all the objects on the scene will be exported. So for this, we'll just click on export selection. Then we have in settings, we have export multiple files. So if you select two files and if you export, then the prefix of the file will be what you name over here, but the file name will be cylinder p cylinder 2 and p cylinder 3. So it depends upon what you rename your file over here. So for this video, I'll just rename this files. Okay, so now the important selection is this one, move to the origin. So select, I'll just click on export to single file and click on this. So if you just hover, you can see it gives us a note, set translation and rotation of each hierarchy root to 0 on export. Just click on this. So I do not want any materials. So we can just untick these two. If you want it, you can keep it. Then in path, you can select your path. So I'll just select this and name, I'll just make SM. So you click on export, click on your second mesh, you can rename this, and you can just export. Let's go back to Unreal. So let's drag and drop our mesh. Now here we have two mesh, SM01 and 02. So this is the 01, which is placed over here, and the pivot is onto the bottom. This is the second mesh, and you can see the pivot is on the top. I'll just drag and drop this over here, so you can see the pivot is in the center, and it's on the bottom of the mesh. And here, when we drag and drop, you can see the pivot is in the center, but it's on the top of the mesh. So this is how we set our pivots inside of Maya. So now it has not considered uh, the pivot from the grid. So it has not considered pivot from the location where you have kept your mesh on the grid. So this is how you can use game exporter to keep your pivots intact, to keep your pivots wherever you have kept in your 3D software like Maya. So this is just so this much for this video. You can try it out, and thank you.